Thank you all so much for coming to today's workshop. My name is Alexis, and I am a Cronkite student here at the Walter Cronkite School. It is my senior year, so time is ticking. Like I literally graduate so soon. It's crazy. And I am also with Ollie at ASU as the Intergenerational Learning Service Scholarship recipient for this year. So for those of you who don't know, I was tasked with creating a best practice project focused on intergenerational learning for this scholarship. So being a Cronkite student and knowing how the last year has went, information overload is definitely real. So we have all experienced it. We have all experienced a plethora of new information, and it can be overwhelming for sure. So I thought that a great way to talk about it, especially between generations, would be through a discussion such as this. So that's kind of how digital discussions, medical misinformation came about. And I'm really glad that I got to partner with News Collab on this. They are already doing such amazing work in terms of media literacy and staying informed. So that has been a really great opportunity as well. So that was a little bit about me, just getting started here, but I'm just gonna pass the baton to everyone else who has collaborated on this with me. So Christy, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Alexis. For those of you who I've not met before, I'm Christy Roschke. I'm the managing director of the News Collab at the Cronkite School. And if you're not familiar with the News Collab, we're an organization, as Alexis said, that does a lot of work in the field of media literacy, including offering our free online course, Media Active, which I know many of you have taken or are taking now. So it's wonderful to see you all. Celeste?
Sure thing. I'm Celeste Sepsi. I am a program manager at the News Collab, and I also teach at the Cronkite School. And I'm especially excited about this because Alexis was one of my star students. Seems like it was a decade ago, but it was like 3 years ago when she was just a little baby freshman. So I'm very happy to be here and to learn from everyone.
Hi, I'm Abby Baker. I'm the program manager with Ollie at ASU. I was just given this role like a couple months ago, so that's a new thing. But basically, Ollie at ASU offers learning opportunities for people over the age of 50. I've been with Ollie at ASU for 5.5 years now, and I love my job. And part of my job is getting to be part of the committee who chooses our fabulous intergenerational learning service scholarship recipients. So our committee selected Alexis, and I'm happy to be able to be here and to learn this along with everyone and just be able to see everyone's faces. Thank you.
Alrighty, so then that's kind of our introductions here. And next up will be, what the heck are we going to be talking about? So as you guys all know, this is going to first and foremost be a discussion, a conversation. I am not here to lecture you. I am just as curious as everyone here as to what we all know and don't know about health information, the science information that has come out, especially pertaining to the pandemic. There's a lot to sift through, and what better way to do it than just to talk about it with one another. So with that being said, it's important to bring all generations together so we don't walk away from future discussions feeling like you're screaming internally, from not being understood or heard. This is definitely a space to hold tough conversations and just to be fully transparent about everything. And I know that sometimes that can be hard with family, especially. So I think talking amongst students is a great first step to try and have these real conversations. Another important thing to note is, yes, I'm going to be presenting a little bit at the beginning here, but if you have any comments, you want to jump in, please feel free to use the chat. Please feel free to unmute, interject as much as you want. This really is just a conversation. So if I hear myself talk too much, I might get sick of it. So please feel free to interrupt if you have anything that you want to share. Alrighty, so then I know this was presented in the pre-registration form if you did get around to it. If not, that's totally fine. But I did just want to take a minute to ask you all, where and how do you get your health information? And this would be in terms of the sources that you use, maybe the platforms that you use. If it's like podcast based, social media based, you stick to the news, your local stations. So if you want to take a moment to type in the chat where and how you get your health information, I think it would just be nice to see that kind of exposure and familiarity with everyone. So please go ahead and take a second here to type that in the chat, and we'll kind of see what pops up and where everyone's getting their information from. All right, so we've already got a couple coming in, mostly social media based, mainly Twitter. Health information from social media, Instagram, Medicare bulletins, that's cool. TV news from a newsletter my health insurance sends me. Newsletters are really important. Doctor's office, get really overwhelmed when I rely on television or traditional mass media. For my health information, I focus more on following doctors I trust in social media, along with podcasts who interview health experts and scientific Americans. Kimberly, I definitely agree with feeling overwhelmed by television and mass media. And I'm going to get into that in a second because I definitely resonate with that. Even being a journalism major, right? I'm like my own profession. Sometimes it's overwhelming. And then New York Times, PBS NewsHour. Let's see. Celeste says she follows lots of local journalists on Twitter. I love that. Local news is very important. I started following us medical experts on Twitter related to COVID, which has been helpful. I like that recommendation too. Yeah, that's a good one. Using our social media to follow the experts. That's cool. Twitter accounts for key figures. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of us are either like social media based with Twitter and following not necessarily news channels, but like people who are experts in the field. I think that's really interesting to note. Great stuff. And then, yeah, those who follow specifically like their Medicare and insurance providers, that's really interesting too. Alrighty, so then if I can follow up here. One thing that I did want to share is something that I get newsletters from the New York Times, and one that I got on March 24th, so a few weeks ago, that I thought was really fascinating was the US media offering a different picture of COVID-19 is what one study found. And if you see what I highlighted in red here, when COVID cases were rising in the US, the news coverage emphasized the increase. When cases were falling, the coverage instead focused on those places where cases were rising. And when vaccine research began showing positive results, the coverage downplayed it, as far as an economics professor at Dartmouth College could tell. So I thought when I read this that it was so fascinating to hear, because I remember especially last year when things were maybe March, April, May, June here, especially when it started getting crazy, my birthday month, that, yeah, the coverage was really scary. Sometimes, again, being a journalism major, watching the news made me feel anxious, hearing about all of the terrible things that were happening with COVID. And of course, we need to hear it because it is important to our health, to our mentality. But yeah, at the same time, it was a lot of negative stuff happening that was affecting mental health as well. So I thought that was really interesting to read from that newsletter. I'm kind of jumping in the chat too, just because I can't pull it up right away. So just wanted to see if anyone, oh yeah, I had to concisely stop listening for a bit. I definitely agree. So then with the next part of the newsletter, they drew a graph just to kind of show the coverage, but about 87% of COVID coverage in national US media last year was negative. The share is 51% in international media, 53% in US regional media, and 64% in scientific journals. And that it went across, in terms of media outlets, those with more of a liberal audience as well as those with a conservative audience. So just by far, that is what the study found. With that, I did want to note, if you guys want to type in the chat, if you want to unmute, I did want to ask, when you were reading through news related to COVID within last year, this year, what stood out the most for you? Did you hear only about the bad stuff, or did good news resonate as well? And another thing to note too would be, did this change depending on the kind of news that you were engaged with? So whether it was local or on a national level. So if you—
Alexis, can I answer verbally?
Yes, please do.
I think my experience when it became super real, it was so scary and really negative and really overwhelming and like addicting. And so Adara in the chat said that she had to stop listening or to stop reading the news for a little bit. And I found myself to do the same thing. Like I deleted Instagram off my phone and Twitter off my phone at one point because I would just be up at 3 a.m, like looking at things and being really upset about it. And then I think there was this like come to Jesus in the industry where people wanted to like hear the humanizing stories. There was that like news fatigue that was just like, we know cases are bad. Like we see this every day. I don't need to know the numbers anymore. Like tell me the stories that matter. That was just my experience. So I appreciated when it kind of turned into like the human side while still giving us the information we needed.
Definitely. I think especially those first few months was so much number-based, data-based, rather than storytelling with the community. So once that started rolling around, I think it got either more digestible or just allowed us to not focus so much on the terribleness of the numbers, but to see what other impacts were going on, and some good, some bad. We have a couple going on in the chat here if everyone wants to look, but let's see, I remember at one point I had to stop reading the news because it was overwhelming and bleak. I only heard negative things and it was anxiety provoking. It seems to me that the news business has a hard time finding a balance between general stories that can paint a picture of either good or bad and zeroing in personal anecdotes like Celeste is talking about. Is there a happy middle? That is a good thing to know.
I'm still
Yeah.
looking for it. I was going to add, if I could, Alexis, that it's been interesting to me and something that's been stressful. And I think a couple people, and like Hope's comment kind of speaks to this a little bit, that while there certainly is a national story of COVID, every state is so different. So what's happening in Arizona is very different. What's happening in Hawaii, what's happening in California, Virginia, some of the places, we're all from different places on this call even. So our lived reality has been very different than the national story. It's really not a national story. It's a very local story. So when you're hearing these national numbers, I found it very difficult to like put it into perspective to what it meant to like, should I go outside of my house? Like generally speaking, like I'm not going to get on a plane or I'm not going to be traveling and I understand what I'm supposed to do, but what is the threat to me right here in Arizona? And I feel like that's been really hard to find.
Yeah, I agree. And Adara wrote, with friends socially distanced at the park, I would ask that we did not discuss COVID. We needed to focus on positive things and not so much of the doom and gloom of COVID, which I think is really interesting, right? Because what's the saying of like, when you're with friends and family, don't discuss politics, don't discuss, what is the other one? Politics and religion. And now it's COVID, like we got 3 now. So I mean, yeah, because it has affected everyone on the local level, community level, family level so differently that it can sometimes feel like a sensitive subject, just because you don't know what that person's background and experiences with it are, if they have dealt with it firsthand, have had family members who have dealt with it firsthand, had family and friends that have passed away from it, have been economically impacted by the situation that we're in. there's definitely a lot going on. So
Well, and I found that in the beginning, they were making an effort to make it so scary to keep us from going and doing things. And they would quote how terrible the United States numbers were. And I made a point to go out online and look for per capita numbers. So the per 100,000, and we were way down on the severe list when you looked at per 100,000 people with COVID or dying with COVID or whatever numbers they were projecting, that they were making it sound a lot worse than it was comparatively to other countries. And so I continue to do that whenever they start throwing out their numbers, because I don't believe them for a minute. When you talk about the negative, one thing that I found very helpful, there was a local guy here in Richmond, Virginia, that started a Facebook group called Unintended Positives. The only thing you're allowed to post there are unintended positives that came out of the COVID lockdowns. And so throughout the year, people have been posting things that have brought good things to their lives because they're no longer out stressing and running around and doing all the things they were doing before, but have taken time to get with family and spend time with family and their pets and all the other things that they didn't take time to do before.
Laura, that is really amazing that you mentioned that. Oh my gosh, yes, I love everyone blowing up. Unintended positive, Celeste. I started a pretty extensive backyard garden. Kimberly follows an Instagram account called the Good News Movement, which is doing a similar thing. Yeah, wait, is Good News, is that the one with, what is his name? John Krasinski. He is from The Office. I thought, yeah, it is crazy that at one point it did feel like there was such a deficit of any sort of happy, hopeful story. And then there were places, Facebook groups, organizations that stepped up and wanted to remind everyone that there's still good things happening, even in terrible situations. Reports on good news stories. Thank you, Kimberly. So yeah, it is crazy. And then just the last note from what I had read with that was that if we're constantly telling a negative story, we're not giving our audience the most accurate portrait of reality. We're doing as journalists, we're doing a good job telling you why COVID cases are rising in some places and how the vaccines are imperfect, but not such a good job explaining why cases are falling elsewhere or how the vaccines save lives. Perhaps most important, we are not being clear about which COVID developments are truly alarming. So those were just some of the tidbits that I took from that resonated with me as a communicator, as a student, as a news consumer. So I just thought that was interesting and something to kind of note. In terms of the pandemic, I also included this in the pre-registration form. If you didn't get around to it, that's totally fine. But I did just want to also take a moment, if you'd like to unmute, if you'd like to chat again. What do you wish you knew more about concerning health information during the pandemic within the last year and how everything has just so rapidly been changing?
I have something to add, I guess. And
Yes.
it's more so something I've learned recently. I was one of the people that commented saying I follow a few doctors and experts on social media. And as a young person, a lot of the discussion I hear right now is, I'm so over being quarantined, I'm just going to take my chances and, I probably won't die. And that kind of seems to be the only consequence that's really being reported on, is if people live or die. But a lot of the doctors I'm following are kind of showing the things they see coming up for their young patients, that are things like their patient might not have even had a severe case or even realize they had it, but now they're getting pulmonary embolisms, or they're getting long-term effects that I guess technically they probably can't fully link them to COVID yet. But I definitely feel like that portion is not being talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can I express my own opinion?
Yes, of course.
This is the richest country on earth. 550,000 people have, over 550,000 people have died as a result of COVID-19. And I find it unacceptable, even based on the numbers that were quoted by someone earlier. It's just a way to shade the deaths as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it is definitely. Thank you both, Robert and Kimberly, for sharing. Kimberly, I think you definitely bring up a good point about not life and death, but just consequences in general of having had COVID, and how, because we don't know of those long-term effects, it's something that we're going to hopefully learn more about as time progresses. But the coverage does definitely seem to be lacking.
Alexis, I have a thought there, and I'm not sure if any of you joined our conversation with the Scientific American editor-in-chief, Laura Helmuth, last week. It seems like so long ago, but part of that conversation was about how what's happening in coverage of science and health and medicine is that, you know, journalism has gone through a very tumultuous time in the past 20 or so years. And so as a result, many very experienced, knowledgeable journalists have left the profession or retired or taken a buyout, right? And so the people who probably could have provided a more nuanced look at like this second paragraph of the quote here and exactly what Kimberly was talking about, those people just they're not in journalism anymore for these very awful reasons. And so, you know, everyone, I forget who said this recently or where I read this, and maybe it was Laura, and it's just stuck in my head. Like in this past year, everyone has turned into a health reporter. Like every journalist has had to shift their focus, whether they cover education or politics or business, right? Like everything has a COVID angle now, a pandemic angle because of this, but like that's not everyone's expertise. So when we're thinking about the coverage maybe failing a little bit, like we can definitely trace it back to what's happened in the industry and the fact that, you know, your local newspaper, like if you don't live in a news desert, your local newspaper maybe has a third of the staff that it did in 2005. And like how does that affect what they're covering? Like maybe they only have the bandwidth to give the basic update with the numbers, right? And not like do those really in-depth looks, which is just a kind of a sad reality of journalism right now.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
I think another interesting thing that like I wish that we saw more of was conversations that were like yes and in terms of reporting, right? Like if you think about Kimberly saying that like there are young people who are like, oh, I'll just take my chances, contrasted with Robert's point of like people have died, right? Like both of those things are true. And so I feel like oftentimes when I read news stories, they just provide one side of it because they're either, Celeste, like you were saying, right, it's not their expertise, or they don't want to confuse the audience or whatever it is. But then I'm left trying to like piece together all of these things that are true at the same time and then figure out what that means for me, instead of, maybe I'm asking too much, instead of asking somebody to like do it for me so that I can just like read it.
No, Abby, I mean, yeah, if there was just that one hub or that one like personalized, all right, here's everything you need to know, and this is exactly what it is, then we'd all be set.
I think that's why I've been going to Twitter so much, because I can read these threads. I mean, I've just become really a big fan of Twitter threads from medical professionals, people that have all kinds of experiences, and it helps, I don't know, it helps ground me and helps me be able to relate to others who are having different experiences. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can talk about later about, you know, who you should listen to on Twitter and who you shouldn't. But in terms of like finding those stories and helping me figure out, and sometimes it's perspective, you know, when I feel like I'm sick of being home and, you know, having my own pity party, then I'll read something about something really horrible that's happened to some of them who are, oh, now I know why I'm doing this, so it helps to give me that perspective check. And so I don't know, I didn't know that I'd ever say that I would go to Twitter for nuance, but that's I've been finding it a little bit lately.
Yeah.
I've appreciated your
definitely-
Twitter list.
I was just going to add, I agree that I think the reason why social media, like following experts on social media, is so helpful now, and tying it back to Abby, is that I also feel like there are a lot of one-sided stories or things I have to piece together. And when I can go straight to the expert and not have to hear it interpreted through someone else, it kind of takes out that element of where the news feels like I'm having to interpret like a game of telephone.
Right. And part of the problem too is even the experts don't know, because things keep happening that change what they said before, and nobody can help that. That's just the way this virus is, and it's caused so much confusion, since one day they think one thing and the next day they think something else.
Yeah, I know that was one thing, just like talking with my parents, that they were very frustrated about, and not in terms of why don't they give us the answers, but just like the reality of the situation, that this information is changing so often. And the experts who are able to convey this to us, they're going through it right with us. So it can make things feel confusing and just information overload. So
Alexis,
yes.
one of the most disturbing factors of this pandemic is the politics involved in the wearing masks, anti-vaccines. I read an article this morning about 40% of Republican men refused to take the vaccine. The article was about evangelicals. It talked about them in the United States and Uganda. And the evangelicals that exist in Uganda also refuse to take the vaccine. This has all been brought about because of the politics involved in this. Certain segments of the population are for vaccination and masks, and certain segments of the population are against it. And one of the most amusing things is people that are thrown off planes refuse entrance to Walmart. Walmart has the best ones. They roll around on the floor protesting masks, and it's ridiculous. It was all this was brought about by politics.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Robert. I definitely know that we all feel that impact, and that unfortunately that kind of has turned into the reality, and that it shouldn't be a political matter. It first and foremost is of health and public safety and importance, but that's kind of how it's been. And leading into that, from the pre-registration form, what some of you guys had noted was in terms of what you want to know more about. So some of this we had gotten into here. And I resonated with like each and every one of these, because we're all still wondering and we're all still discussing. So thank you all so much for sharing in terms of what we're all in the same boat with. I believe this next slide here was something that I noted from first draft, and it kind of, this was a November 2020 report, so it's a little outdated. But at the time, last year in November, these were kind of the dominant vaccine narratives going on. So in terms of the topics, which is the top row, we have political and economic motives, safety, efficacy, and necessity, development, provision, and access, conspiracy theories and narratives, liberty and freedom, and morality and religion. And I think that we have definitely seen this either reading about it listening to it, watching it, talking about it amongst family members, friends. We all have those different perspectives. So that I would say a lot of these topics still kind of prevalent to where we are right now in April. But we're definitely a lot more, I guess, vaccine. Now all we want to know about is vaccines and those sorts of effects. So, oh, thank you for adding that, Celeste. So yeah, it is a very interesting report, and I still think it prevalent to what we're currently going through. So were there any sort of topics that you guys felt were really prevalent either in your personal life, in just what you've witnessed in the media? I know a lot of them are like, we definitely hear about all of these, so.
I'll tell you the most out there one that I've heard, and a friend of mine is so wrapped up in it, it's scary, is that they're going to put a microchip in you with the shots or with the tests. Don't get a test, don't get a shot. And she has never been like that before. So this is very scary to me.
Mhm.
And I can't talk her out of it.
I think with those kinds of conversations, just Laura, if I may, do you ever like prompt her with that, hearing her side and what she
Oh
has
yeah.
to say, but asking like where she got the information from, like if you could look at it as well?
Yes, she sends me all sorts of things that she's looking at, and then I go fact check them and go send her back the things that say that it's a bunch of baloney, and it doesn't get anywhere. So,
Gotcha.
and she's part of the evangelical group, and so I can't make a dent.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad you're going through the fact checking and you're literally doing everything that the News Collab and this workshop are, are about. So, and there is no like right answer about having these harsh conversations, especially with those who may not be as apt to listening or are very set in the information that they find. So, but with your due diligence and you trying and you doing your part, I mean, that is all that anyone can ask for, I would say. You know that you've been doing your best. So,
Well, and it's what I have found is whatever it is she thinks, there's some kernel of truth that they have exploded into chaos. And so, in fact, that Help Is This True Facebook page, I sent one of them to them because there was truth to it, but I needed to understand beyond it, and I wasn't able to figure that out. And so they helped me out with that one.
Yeah, the kernel of truth, Laura, is tough. And this is something we can dig into a little deeper in our breakout groups too. So I would be, hopeful that when we're in the smaller groups too, we can share maybe if there's things that have worked for others, or just kind of, I don't know, workshop it a little bit, because it's like sometimes fact checking it's tough because it's not that something's false. I mean, the microchip obviously is false, but then there's some other piece of it that has some factual basis or some historical context or something like that convinces someone. So there's definitely multiple layers there. But I think these will be good good breakout group discussions too.
Where the microchip thing comes from, I think, is from Sweden, where they willingly have microchips put into their hands that give them access to their security buildings. And they use them instead of irises or fingerprints, they use these chips that they have had installed. So but they're not doing it with COVID shots. They're doing it, it's like when you microchipped an animal, it takes a bigger implement to put it in, but that's where it starts.
gotcha. And along the lines of fact checking. I know we might all be at different levels with that in our familiarity and processes. I did just want to share a quick one that I think we can all kind of go through in the breakout groups. But to let you know about this model, it is called SIFT, and it is from Mike Caulfield, which is what university is he from, Christy?
Washington State University, Vancouver.
Wonderful, awesome, yeah. So he came up with this model, really short and sweet process that I think we all can get on board with. When you come across a piece of information, maybe like a social media post, something that you hear, and it conveys, or it allows you to feel a lot of emotion, whether if you get kind of angry from the post, if you think that it's really, I don't know, great news or anything like that. If you're feeling some sort of overboard of emotion, the first thing you might want to do is to stop and think about why you felt that, and look into it. You want to investigate the source. So if it is social media, who posted it? What is their presence on social media? Have they been banned before for misbehavior? Maybe the information comes from like a profile that is very ambiguous. So thinking about that. The third step would be to find better coverage, which could be something as simple as typing keywords into Google and seeing what pops up within the first couple of hits. And then the last step would be to trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. So if something was in fact said, then what was the situation that it occurred in, just to provide that final context. So really quick, I was going to show the last part of a video that Christy actually did through News Collab. So let me go ahead and see about that. I think I might have to stop sharing and reshare. So actually, everyone give me 1 second. Let's see. Okay, so I pulled it up on this last part. So this is just an example that Christy had just to get a gauge of how it works. I hope everyone can hear it right now. Let's see. Someone give me a thumbs up when I press play.
Our final claim will look at something more serious. You may have seen this text yourself, as it really made the rounds in March 2020. The text claimed that the president was going to evoke something called the Stafford Act in order to place the entire country on lockdown to stop the spread of COVID-19. I received this text from a well-intentioned friend who said she'd received it from an acquaintance with some firsthand knowledge on the subject. And that's really how all these chain texts and emails go. It's how rumors have always spread. Someone knows someone who really knows someone or something about the topic. And I'll be honest, I panicked for a minute when I received this text. I was away from my family at the time, and I got really worried that I was going to be stuck away from them indefinitely. I was just about to forward this on, but then I remembered my training, took a beat, and decided to investigate. So for this, I wanted to investigate the source and trace claims back to the original context. So if you take a look at this text here, it looks like this person was saying that they had some evidence that this was going to happen because it was being talked about on Meet the Press. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and open another tab and do some keyword searching. So first, we're going to go ahead and look at the text message itself in the lockdown. And after doing a quick search, we can see that straight away, these first choices here are all fact checks discussing the viral text and indicating that it's a false claim and that this text was a hoax. So we've got several different news organizations who have taken the time to fact check it and to assure us that it's a hoax. So that's my first search. Then I am still curious about what this whole Meet the Press thing is about. So I'm going to go ahead and search some different terms. So for this search, I use the term Stafford Act lockdown and put Meet the Press in quotation marks, so it would be searched together. And the very first results is a transcript from the show on March 15th, which is actually the day that I received the text message. And if you take a look at the transcript, which I did already, you can see that we're talking about how the president has declared a national emergency and that other countries have been on lockdown, and then that's something that some places are considering. But there's never any mention of the president using the Stafford Act to declare a nationwide lockdown for COVID-19. So once I've gone to back to the original source, I can see that there's no evidence that this was discussed on Meet the Press. So between this and my previous search, where I was able to find several pieces of news coverage debunking the text message, I'm glad that I didn't send it on in panic, because it's clear that this was just another example of a hoax email that spread widely because it was something that people were inclined to believe, given the state of what was going on and is still going on today as I record this.
Yeah, so I think that was a really great example of the process of SIFT. And I remember hearing about that too, not through text, but someone had mentioned it to me in person. And I remember thinking, like, there's no way that that can happen. But in a state of urgency, panic, especially at that time, like, we had no toilet paper in grocery stores. It felt like it could have been real. So that's sort of the process that you can take there. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So we have gone over the SIFT method. We've kind of gone over the state of health information today, where we get our information from. I definitely want to take the time now to get more personal. So Christy or Celeste, if you could maybe start designating those breakout room groups. We are going to be splitting up for about 25 minutes to go over a couple more questions that we wanted to delve into and just discuss. So with that, if you have your microphone capabilities, please use them during those breakout groups. If you can turn your camera on, even better. That part, it won't be recorded, right? Because we'll all be in separate breakout rooms. Yeah, so like it's not going anywhere. This is just for us, just to talk about this. So when we do get into those breakout rooms, please do so. And each of us four, so me, Christy, Celeste, and Abby, will be in there with you guys, facilitating. So does anyone have any questions before we get started with that?
I have all the rooms ready. So I'm actually going to pause the recording so that we don't.
I was just going to ask you, so thank you.
I am notorious for forgetting, and then, at the end being like, oh, glad I missed half of that.
Let's see, we're at 17. I think this should be everyone, right? Yeah, okay, perfect. So I don't know how everyone else's breakout rooms went. We literally didn't get past the first question because we all were so good at sharing our experiences. And I think that's wonderful too, because just providing those different viewpoints and backgrounds is really important. Would anyone from my group like to share a little tidbit about anything that they learned from another individual, or just key takeaways that you got from kind of discussing together?
Well, I can start, and I would just say the people in our group are just some outstanding people. We had different perspectives, and you can tell by, and I use the analogy, the hair color. We had quite a difference in generational periods, but some of the experiences were very much the same. And we also had with us Monica, and she's from Georgia, and she had a lot of insight into the journalism aspect. Our interactions with other people, we had a lot of discussion on that. So we had a really great group.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And just the kinds of viewpoints we bring to was really interesting. Hope and I kind of resonated on the customer service route, and mask mandates and the kinds of reactions we get from people in that way. So not necessarily, I mean, it is a matter of holding a difficult conversation with a stranger on this topic that we have to enforce as those who are in customer service and are in that management, and then having some guests who might be very reactive to that. That I thought was really interesting to resonate with. And Monica bringing in the idea of what states or like cities, I guess, sacrificed, whether it was like economic based or health based or just community based, in what they considered most important. So that was really interesting as well. Maybe if we want to hear, just because I'm looking right next to me, Christy's group next, what you guys kind of discussed.
Sure. Well, like you, we didn't really get past the first question either. We talked a bit about, we talked a bit about our situation and interactions with family and neighbors and that sort of thing. Kimberly or Sandra, either one of you want to add anything about what we talked about in the group? I'm happy to represent too, if that's better. It was interesting to me that, oh, go ahead, Sandra.
I don't know. There were only 3 of us, but I felt that we had the generational thing as well. I noticed that right away. I don't know. I really don't know what to say.
No, I think that's right. I think it was nice to hear about, just interesting to hear about how we've all kind of been living in some strange state of suspended animation for the last year, and some of the ways that it's changed and it's changing now with vaccinations and that sort of thing. We shared, conversations with parents. That's always fun, and helping them, and where maybe we were feeling like we had to parent our parents in terms of some of the guidelines and things, which has been interesting. And so I think I learned a lot and certainly benefited from the experience. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I think one thing that we also in my group, we mostly talked about question 1, 2, and we talked a little bit about other things, but one thing that we were kind of hitting on was, like, the closer you are to the subject, the harder the situation becomes, right? Like, if I have an extended family member who's sharing something on Instagram that is blatantly fake, like, I'm going to have an easier time like having that conversation with someone that I'm like not very close to, but feel compelled to say something, right? I wanted to share, just kind of like switching gears a little bit. We had a really interesting talk about the fact checks. So I shared some findings from First Draft, and we were talking about how, obviously if I'm scrolling through Facebook and I see that someone has shared something that's been grayed out and it says like a third-party fact checker has deemed this untrue or whatever it may be, like, that's helpful for me mostly to see like who shared something that's untrue, so I can roll my eyes and like be kind of mad about it. But the people who are actually sharing this information, Katie, I don't want to put you on the spot, but she had this comment that was basically like,
yeah,
go ahead.
So I brought up like my brother, he's big on posting stuff that's constantly being fact checked because he believes a lot in conspiracy theory. And so he's constantly getting fact checked, and it basically turns into like his motivation to prove everybody wrong. It almost fires him up because he reposts. He's like, I'm being censored, they're trying to take away my free speech, all this stuff. So the fact check really, like, it's beneficial, I guess, for some people, but it really just fires him up more. So that's what I mean. And I know that I was the only person to express that, because it really does. They just are like, oh, I'm being censored. Like, I'm going to show you guys that this is actually the truth and your fake news is wrong.
Right. It's like the people taking screenshots and posting things on social media, like calling it fake news, right? Like the fact check is fake news.
Yeah.
Also, I will say we're having another Media Active session with Harrison Montas, he's a reporter at the International Fact Checking Network. I may have forgotten one word in that title, but no, okay. That's later this month, so I'll be sure to share a link to those events in case you are interested more in fact checking and to see how it works and if it's successful and why.
Yeah, it can definitely be a bit of semantic gymnastics when we're talking about media literacy, and some of the things that Katie, you just said, and Celeste said about you use the same media literacy principles to do your own research and find your own facts, and you can fact check anything on the internet. Really, you can find an answer to any question, whatever you want that answer to be. So it becomes very difficult, because then it becomes like, well, my facts are better than your facts. And as a media literacy educator, I have to be very careful about not suggesting that my way is the right way, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But the preponderance of evidence from experts, and who are the experts that can provide the evidence that we should be listening to. So it becomes you kind of have to have these conversations using different words and different approaches. Almost it's like a one-to-one experience, which can be taxing, especially when we're talking about conspiracy theory, which is like a whole nother beast. But so I appreciate y'all sharing. Abby, how about your group?
Our group got past the first question, not to brag or anything, but so we had a really good conversation, and it was interesting because I was thinking about how I'm gonna like wrap it up. And I noticed a theme that we didn't notice when we were in our breakout room, but we actually had a lot of conversation about things that weren't there. So one member of our group was talking about how, they live outside of the United States. And so there's just like not information there. It just like doesn't exist. So then it almost becomes impossible to try to do some sort of fact checking if there's not enough to check against, which I think is a very real thing that, especially as Americans, we often take for granted that we get access to check our own facts. And then another member of our group was talking about how other countries were having conversations about how to be healthier during the pandemic. And it seemed like America wasn't doing that. We were just having conversations about COVID and not about like eating healthier, making sure that you're staying active, things like that can lead to overall like wellness and health. And then another person was talking about how there's like a lack of translation of science information. So there's the science there, and then there's the every person, and there's not a good enough explanation of how the science works for us to feel comfortable with it. So we were talking about like reticence or hesitancy in getting the vaccine. I think a lot of us are like, well, the vaccine process was like really spread up, and I don't understand the science behind that, so I don't trust it. Instead of science doing a better job, the science people, whoever they are, doing a better job telling us how it works so that we can believe it. So that I think were like the big themes. And then another thing that was really interesting was Alexis put together this cool activity that you didn't get to. That was it was like going through the SIFT thing. And I just want to note that Ursula found that in the SIFT thing, Pfizer was spelled wrong, and I would not have noticed that. So even things like just checking for like spelling and grammar can be a good way to very easily be like, false, move on.
I'm glad she noted that, because I noted that too when I was, I made a key for the answers afterwards. And then when I was making the key and doing the SIFT method, I was like, wait, that's spelled wrong. So yeah, it was a fun little activity. Sorry, my group, we didn't get to it, but we did have a fun conversation, and that's ultimately what was important, even if we didn't get around to everything. I hope that we all walk away at least feeling some sort of, I don't know, empathy towards one another and having these conversations. Obviously, we all come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different states, different countries, but we are dealing with this pandemic and the information that comes with it in all together. So that really was the most important takeaway from this. Does anyone else want to share something that they took away in having this conversation with a different audience?
Alexis, I mean, this doesn't answer your question, but one thing that we very briefly talked about in my group at the very end was like what advice we had for each other to like have a healthier relationship with media. And pretty much everyone had to say that it's about like being aware and mindful of what you're consuming, and whether that means deleting an app or putting a time limit or knowing, Laura made the comment of like not relying on extreme left or extreme right sources of information. I just thought that was a really smart thing to do, and something that we talk about in Media Active is we have people do a 24-hour media diet journal, and I did it and Christy did it and everyone else has done it, and it's very eye-opening to think like how many times do I look at my phone, or do I pick up or do I open my browser on my computer, right? And I think that the mindfulness is something that we can all do a better job on.
Absolutely. And then Celeste, I know that you already posted the event in the chat. Would you also like to express anything else with the Media Active course, just so that those who attended today, if they want to learn more about the kind of practices and tools that we can use to become better media consumers, do you just want to speak on that behalf?
Sure. So in the chat, I will put a link to our course. Like Christy mentioned at the beginning, we recognize some friendly faces for people who have taken the course before, and so we're not asking you to take the course again. But I will say that, this is a self-paced course. It's totally free. It's through ASU, and it's all about how to be a better media consumer and creator. We've shifted the focus of it to be more about health and science, and what better timing, like we're all inundated with this information, and so we want to improve how we're consuming it and what we're sharing. Chrissy, do you have, I'm trying to think of what other spiel I can give.
Oh, I think that's great. I mean, if you have taken the course and you want to sign up again, it's pretty easy to identify the new readings and stuff that you could do, quickly. And it's just as simple as signing up through the same form that you did before. And for those of you who haven't taken it, and for my students and other ASU students who are on the call that aren't familiar, this is a great course. It's intended for adults. It's, sort of an informal learning activity that can take anywhere between 3 and 6 hours, kind of depending on how deep you go into the course. So if you have siblings, parents, grandparents, friends that you think might be interested in the course, it's, again, like Celeste said, it's free to sign up, and she put the link in the chat. So I would be grateful if you wanted to share it. And then the list of events is a perk of taking the class. But of course, since you're all here today, you get to attend any of the events that you want, whether or not you've taken that course. So no, I think that covers it.
Yeah, and I guess since we're talking about events, I will just let you guys know we have a few coming up. So I already mentioned Harrison. We're also talking to someone from the Trust Project tomorrow, and from iNewsSource, which is a San Diego-based news outlet, about the importance of credibility in health coverage. So we're kind of continuing this health theme. And then next week, for some of my younger folks who are studying media and digital audiences, I'm super excited because we're talking to a woman. Her name is Dr. Shauna Harrison, and it's about, she's a fitness influencer, a yoga influencer who, her PhD is in public health. And so we're going to be talking about how people can find better health information using social media, and kind of what's gone right with the pandemic and what's gone wrong. You guys have probably seen influencers sharing information that's good and sharing information that's bad. So I'm excited to hear this conversation with Shauna. So feel free to sign up if you'd like to join us.
Thank you so much, Celeste.
Yeah.
We are right on time. I can't believe that I really didn't know if I was going to go over or under, but we're like literally right on time. So that's perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's really great that the culmination of my efforts was today, and it was really, really fun to get to pull all of this together, to work with such incredible women, and to hear from such incredible people. So thank you guys so much again. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I think you'll have Christy's email from when you registered for the event, so you can please feel free to reach out. Please continue on with News Collab with those events that are coming up because they sound really interesting. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye.